Well, good morning. My name is Pierce. I serve as one of the pastors here, serve as teaching pastor, and glad that you guys have joined us today on this really cold day. And I have you guys know this. I'm a New York Giants fan, and they've been terrible. I keep coming back to this because the season is getting closer and closer to being over. And but as many of you guys know, the Chiefs won yesterday, and which is fantastic if you're a Chiefs fan. If you're not, then it is what it is. Listen, I do like the Chiefs. They're fine. And it's just like I'm mourning because my team is so terrible. But in my house, my wife's a Chiefs fan, and my two boys, guess what fans they are? Chiefs fans. And this is how you know that our house there's a collision every once in a while, is because the Chiefs win. And Kai came up to me. He's like, "Daddy, Giants, right?" I said, "Yeah, buddy." He's like, "Losers." And then Chiefs winners, and so that's our house, and so it's I was like, "Yeah, buddy," but you know what? He doesn't know this yet, but it wasn't that long ago the Chiefs were terrible too, and so you guys know, and then those who are fans of Lions, you know the pain of last night too. So anyway, there's this our house is collision course because I'm a Giants fan. I wanted my boys to be Giants fans, but now they're Chiefs fans, and Kai will go around singing Red Kingdom all the time, so it's pretty fun. So we'll see how it goes. And another life thing, TikTok is banned now. So that's another life event here. So people are probably mourning that loss as well. But anyway, last week we started our series, The Gospel of Matthew. And what we're trying to do in this is really use that as a way to kind of form this next year. And as we were praying through and planning through, what we wanted to see last week is we wanted to be able to end our time here with this idea of in our church, we want to see a culture of discipleship develop, and then a habit of influence. That we, in response to the gospel, is to share others like Matthew did. That's what we did last week. We looked at Matthew chapter 9, and where Matthew gets invited to follow Jesus, and then he turns around and goes and gets his other tax collectors and friends over to his house to be able to influence them for the sake of the gospel, to be able to invite them in to the kingdom. And so this year, that's what we're praying for. We're praying for us as followers of Jesus, that yes, as Jeremy said earlier, to become more and better followers of Jesus, not just for our own sakes, but for the sake of our community, our church, our people, our families, that we glorify God with our lives. And so we looked at Matthew, and really it came down to, in this passage, that as you go, Jesus sends out the disciples, says, as you go, proclaim this message that the kingdom of heaven has come near. And that it was to the least of these that Jesus had come to bring his message of mercy. And he says, welcome to the kingdom. That was last week. And what you'll find is that the gospel that you have before you was written down there so you would know that you have a part to play. And that's all Matthew's point. From the beginning of the book to the end of the book, is that you are now sent out to make it more like heaven. And that's how we really are going to be phrasing it throughout this series, is making where you are more like heaven. That in Matthew, through Jesus is going to really, or Jesus through Matthew is really going to inform us what that looks like to make where we live more like heaven. And in this series, we hope to answer that for all as we go through. But today, I'm going to invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 1. We're actually going to be most of our time in Matthew chapter 2, but it's on page 783 in those black pew Bibles in front of you. And if you don't own a Bible, please take that one. We want you to have the copy of the text in front of you. It is our gift to you. So while you're turning there, Matthew is really, throughout this whole gospel, he's going to say it 8 times that those who have ears, let them hear. And his gospel, displayed in both in his life and the individuals that Jesus says he comes for, is about this word inclusion. That bringing people in who weren't supposed to belong find belonging. And I heard it said this way, that the inclusiveness of this gospel is offensive to insiders, and the exclusiveness of the gospel is offensive to outsiders, meaning, hey, the people, it's not just going to be your blood, Israel, that saves you anymore. Not your heritage, not your family. It's not just going to be all ways that lead to heaven, but it's going to be found in Jesus. And Matthew, in his gospel, from the very first verse, will set up that very thing, that found in Jesus, all can be brought in. And he will argue that the kingdom here on earth will look more like heaven because all nations are being invited in. So how do we know? Look at the verse with me. This is what it says, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now pause. All these words here that I've highlighted in yellow are very important. That each of these is going to reinforce the other and tie into the broader story of God's promise and redemption through that begun. So this Messiah word that he uses, if your translation might say Christ because it's the Greek word for the same word. But it basically had it meant a bunch of different things to different people. Some people didn't think of it at all, but others, for others, this was a loaded political context word. And so Matthew uses this in the first verse here unapologetically and really just embraces the title and then lets the words that follow explain what this means. And Matthew, it's going to be that God's chosen representative whose job is to free the world from illness, from death, from sin, and all kinds of oppression. For those who were like competent Jewish hearers, when they heard that, they'd be like, hey, that's the binding promise to David. As we find in 2 Samuel chapter 7, it's really this idea that he says, God promises to David, hey, I'm going to establish your kingdom forever. One of your descendants is going to reign on my throne forever. And so in the same way, you have the son of Abraham that takes the hearer and reader back to the promise to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12, that he promises Abraham a great nation is going to come through you. And so for Matthew, Jesus isn't any son of Abraham. He is the son of Abraham whose mission it is to extend God's blessing to the nation. And so in Matthew chapter 1, in this genealogy of Jesus, Matthew is setting up, he's really connecting all the dots in this genealogy that from Jesus, the Messiah, is from Abraham, who is from David. And for time's sake, we're not going to dive into the genealogy and read through it because that's a lot of names that I can't pronounce. But Jeremy and I are actually going to deep dive into that in a podcast this week. And if you don't know, we have a podcast. It's called the Equip Podcast, hoping to equip you for the work and ministry to be able to be equipped for that. So we'll deep dive into that. But I want you to look at verse 23 with me. Because this is important that in this birth narrative that maybe you celebrated at Christmas, he quotes a scripture here, and he says, she will give birth, referring to Mary, to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. And all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And so as we get into Matthew chapter 2, he's laying the groundwork that following Jesus is the invitation into this story that began from the son of Abraham to the son of David to now fulfilled in Jesus. That this story of redemption, restoration, hope, and healing can be found in the person and God of Jesus. That he has come for people like you and me. Emmanuel came, but here's what we know and what this text is going to show us. That the social, political, and spiritual climate was not the Hallmark Christmas channel or the kids' Christmas play we like to think. It was much more like a collision course. And once Jesus arrives into the world, it was destined to create this dynamic and that was unavoidable clash with existing systems and beliefs of the world. And it's because of Emmanuel, our world has never been the same. So let's start in Matthew chapter 2. Here's what it says. After Jesus was born, so this is Emmanuel, he's setting up, this is what happened in the circumstances in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. And Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And so we're given here a really important piece of information here is during the time of King Herod. Now, King Herod, there's some extra biblical records here, but we know that he reigned here in Judea from 37 BC till his death in 4 BC. And so this is a historical time and place, and it dates this. And before we get into Herod real quick, I want to talk about the state of Israel. It's because when we get to this passage here, God has not spoken to Israel through a prophet for 400 years, often referred as the silent years in Jewish culture. But it was anything but silent. And if you look at the text and look at some outside of the Bible historical documents, it was a forceful period of there's conquest, there was riots, there was revolts, there was political and religious developments, and it's all conflict centered around compromising or not compromising the foundational values and traditions of Israel. But when we get to here, there's under the rule of King Herod, he was really wealthy, he was politically gifted, he was intensely loyal and an excellent administrator, he was clever enough to remain in the good graces of Rome. He had a famine relief program that worked out very well, and he came into power because of his dad, and he accomplished a lot of great things in this area. And he gets the title King Herod the Great because he was skilled as an architect and a builder. And I wanted to show you some of the things. And so this is the area. I know it's kind of hard to see right here. Oh, that one's way easier to see. So up there, if you can look, this is a very massive area. This is called the Caesarea Maritima. And so in here, he had built this all for the emperor of Rome. This is this wide area. But I want to show you something. This thing right here is called the Hippodrome. So this is like there was chariot races. This is well structured, and he was known to be very elaborate. There was a harbor there built. There was also the Hippodrome. There was there was a theater that you can't see now anymore. There was also this Roman temple, this temple that was built, and Herod was known to just being this amazing architect and planner. And part of what he did to really appease is he started rebuilding here. Here's a fortress called Masada right here, and you can't see it very well, but this is actually where his palace was at Masada. And Masada was known, it was this actual place where could be impenetrable by forces. And so this was a fortress that he had built to defend his power. And then not only that, there's this other place called the Herodium. Now, this one is Herod had built this. This is a man-made hill that he built this fortress at the top. And so you have this guy who is fascinatingly good at doing architect stuff. But here's the thing, what we know about King Herod and what this text is going to show you, that he was ruthless. That he was a terrible person. And he did anything he could to keep on to his power. And one of the things he did to really appease the Jewish nation, he started rebuilding the temple in 20 BC. He's saying, hey, the Israelites, they hate me. They don't want me to reign as their king. I'm the king of the Jews. And we know, because of the song, we three kings of Orient are, we think they're kings. But they probably just served as religious advisors for their own kingdoms. And we get this idea that they're skilled in astrology and magic, they're interpreting dreams, and to the east was Babylon, and for centuries was the center of study of the stars. So we have King Herod, who gets approached by these magi, who come in. They're asking, where is the king of the Jews? To the king of the Jews. And so King Herod hears this, and he was disturbed, and all of Israel, or Jerusalem, with him. And so Herod, really here in this passage, we're going to work this narrative, he's having two red flags. Because as a Jew, he was familiar with the star symbolism that was going to announce the arrival of the Messiah. And so he doesn't challenge the magi saying, hey, no, you're wrong. He's like, okay, wait a minute. So Herod knows that he's not the rightful heir to the Davidic throne. His genealogy would say so, and he was sided with Rome to get where he was. But two, the problem is, he's the king of the Jews. This is his power. This is where he's reigning. So now he has a threat to this. And he's having flashbacks because part of how he came into power is people from the east came and invaded Jerusalem, causing him to flee to Rome to get their help. And that's what placed him in power. And so Herod is having flashbacks. He's like, I have these people coming from the east asking where the king is when I'm the king. And so you feel immediately that he's feeling insecure and he's feeling threatened. And as a person who's going to deal with this is where he moves. So he calls together all the chief priests and teachers of the law and asks them, where is the Messiah to be born? In Bethlehem in Judea, they reply, for this is what the prophets have written. But you, Bethlehem, is in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people. So Herod is thinking this. Well, I can't have this other guy taking my throne. I'm the king of the Jews, And what I think is remarkable is, sure, if this is a foreign, just some other guy coming to take his leadership, fine. But for Jews, this isn't just some guy that he's talking about. And I think this gives us a clue to the spiritual health of Israel at this time. Because we hear that the leadership is disturbed with him. Maybe because they know what he'll do if he gets into a rage, but more likely they have aligned themselves politically with him. So if his power base is threatened, so is theirs. And so masked underneath this concern and gathering, he gathers all these religious leaders and says, hey, if these men are correct, Herod knows Scripture will speak to this. That the one that they're coming to see is the true king, making him the illegitimate king. So immediately he's feeling threatened. And the rest of this text is going to show what a king like that does. Look at verse 7. Then Herod the Magi, he called the Magi secretly and found out them from the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, hey, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. And so, biblically speaking, you have pagan Gentile astrologers coming to this king, who now he is tasked to go say, hey, go find them, but they're probably far enough removed that they don't know his reputation. All they see, and they're blinded by this, all they see are these great elaborate structures that he's built. Oh, he's rebuilding the temple. What a devout Jew. Surely he's going to want to know where the Messiah is. That's why they go to him. They can see all the good things and they can see all, not in a bad way, they're blinded by the lights here. They just take him at his word. Man, Herod wants to worship the Messiah. So they go. So after they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen when it rose ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child was with his mother, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And this is a wild story. That you have this star that rose up, and there are a lot of people try to think, since they're astrologers, that it was like Jupiter and the constellation of Pisces and Saturn, and others will believe it's a supernova that exploded that will emit light for several weeks or months. And I think maybe, but what I think is happening is he's writing to a Jewish audience, and he's trying to prove to them, hey, Jesus is the Messiah. And he's tying it, I think, back to Israel when they're wandering in the wilderness. There's a cloud by day and a pillar by fire that led them through the Israelites to the wilderness, and ultimately going to lead them to the promised land. And I think this is what's happening, that this star arose and led them to the house. And however it happened, the star guided the Magi to Jesus' house. And that they were overjoyed when they found him. And they worshiped him. And it's doubtful that these Gentile pagan religious leaders are knowingly worshiping him as fully God. They don't probably understand everything that they have. But in spite of all of this, they revere the child and represent giving him an honor due to him as King of the Jews. And the significance that for these Gentile people coming to worship at the feet of Jesus is important to show him this is how the gospel is inclusive. That it's fulfilling the Great Commission, that therefore go and make all disciples of all nations. So Matthew's pointing, he's saying, listen, the pagans, the Gentiles, the nations, they're here. It's beginning that Gentile pagan astrologers are coming to worship at the feet of Jesus. To those who aren't supposed to find belonging, find it. And here's what we see that I think is really impactful for our own hearts, is that in this, we have the religious leaders who are indifferent. And then we have reverent astrologers. Because the chief priests and the scribes, they were indifferent toward Jesus, to the Messiah. But the Magi, the wise men, sought out the Messiah, Emmanuel, Jesus. That they weren't content just to admire the star. They took action and followed it. They kept searching. They didn't let discouragement from skeptical religious leaders get to them. Instead, they celebrated the star and they reached him. They were overjoyed and they went in and worshiped. And what I think is fascinating is that you have reverent astrologers, you have Gentiles who are kneeling down before the Jesus and who is worshiping as outsiders, the King of the Jews. And they're saying, you're not my king, but I'm still falling before you. They bow down and worship as Gentiles, as outsiders. And the message that ultimately Jesus is the one who brings outsiders in, who will provide hope of salvation for the entire world. And when you compare him to the chief priest and the scribes, they don't do anything. And remember, it's been 400 years since they've heard from God. You would think at just at a moment, if there was a glimmer of hope that the Messiah, the one who was going to come and to restore all things, to make all things new, the one who was going to help in their sin and sickness and oppression, if they thought he was here, they would have ran. But they don't go and search. And Matthew is revealing to us that this is him. They don't see it. They're so blinded by their own worldly pursuits that they've sided themselves with King Herod and that structure. And I think about, I just wrote in my notes, like, what about us? When it comes to our worship of the King, and what we're going to see in this text is that Jesus has stepped into this message. He has stepped into our world. All these things are happening around him. He chose to step in for you and me. And in my worship of him, am I indifferent when I come in here? Am I unmoved by what he's done? Or do I reflect in worship? Am I reverent towards what he's done for you, for me? But then the narrative continues because God warns the astrologers, hey, they're supposed to report, and I think they were going to, but an angel appears to them and says, don't go because Herod. And here's what we learn what happens. Verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. And here's what an illegitimate king will do when feeling threatened and insecure. And when studying this, I tried to find if there's an extra biblical text that shows to back this up, but this is not written only in the Bible. That this is a dark moment in the history of Bethlehem. It's estimated there's probably 1,000 people that live there, so this probably only affected 10 to 30 boys, 2 and under, that were executed. And sadly, the death of innocent boys and the pain of suffering that these families endured in that small town might not have surprised anyone. So historians don't record it. Simply, that's just Herod. Because Herod was known to go to extreme lengths to maintain his power. And towards the end of his life, he suffered all sorts of health issues. It's actually a horrible way to die. And he was paranoid, and it led so many attempts to grasp power. He had 9 to 10 wives, and on a rumor, he had his favorite wife, Miriam, executed along with her mother. Shortly after that, I showed you the hippodrome. He had his own pool at the fortress, and he had his own pool. He had 2 of his sons drowned in his swimming pool. 5 days before he dies, he has his 3rd son killed for plotting against him. And then on his deathbed, he called for all prominent Jewish men to meet him at the hippodrome. And he had it surrounded by soldiers, and he gave orders when he died they were to all be executed because he knew no one would mourn him. But if all these men died, there would sure be tears. And luckily, that order was not carried out. But what you're seeing is the collision of kingdoms, that Herod is trying everything in his power to grasp and keep his kingdom. That you have this tyrant king contrasting with the shepherd king. And Herod, what he did to secure his kingdom, he took innocent lives, his children, wives, sons, and he was trying to take the lives of priests. And the picture Matthew gives us of the arrival of Jesus is breathtaking in its vulnerability. That in verse 1, he's the king of the Jews. In verse 4, he's the Messiah. In verse 6, he's the ruler who will shepherd his people. That in this child, you can see the people's hope for a better future as they deal with the burdens of Roman rule. And this isn't just any child. He's the one meant to bring safety back to the struggling people of God. And yet, in this chapter, Jesus is just a little child. He has no royal help to help care for him. He has no military guard to defend him. He has no palace or army. In fact, an ominous no is sounded. This vulnerable, humble, little rightful king to Israel's throne will be threatened by the deceitful, paranoid tyrant Herod. And you're left thinking, who will care for this king? Who will protect him? How can he possibly survive to bring about these things? The King of the Jews, the Messiah, the ruler, the one who's going to make all things right. Because you look at Herod's history, it was marked by ruthless ambition. He silenced all who were a threat. He orchestrated alliances with people in power in Rome so that he could have the strength of the military to back him. He had a callous brilliance in his strategy about keeping at bay competing forces in Israel. And then historically, no one could compete with Herod, especially one so vulnerable as the infant Jesus lying helplessly in the arms of a young peasant mother, protected only by a lowly, unproven father from the insignificant town of Nazareth. And the biblical truth we see in this text, if you follow all their stories, is that God is in control. And you look, and I kept out Joseph's story just for time's sake, but you're looking at all these stories. You have Joseph being appeared to by an angel, hey, warning him over and over and over. And Mary appeared to say, hey, you're going to carry the child, Emmanuel, God with you. And you see, for as begins his redemption of humanity, his hand is on every event that takes place in this chapter. From the appearance of the star to the Magi, and appearing to Joseph, to the Gentile Magi, bowing down in worship. This family is provided with gifts that will enable them to escape this plot. Innocent Magi routed to save them from Herod. And all the way through this, God is at work behind the scenes. One of the most crucial things in our story. And Matthew's point to this chapter is the response to the Messiah. It's ultimately going to become a story of acceptance or rejection. That's what it comes down to. Those who wholeheartedly give their life towards it, and those who are blinded by their own desires. Many people fall between these two things. And if you take all these circumstances from this text, from all that took place, it's not this Hallmark Christmas card. There is great pain, there's sinfulness, there's heartache, there's brokenness wrapped into the story of the birth of Jesus. That God stepped into our mess to bring lost causes in. And to the scared Joseph and Mary charged with the care and safety of Emmanuel, he came for them. To the families who grieved the death of their sons because of Herod, he came for them. To the people under harsh rule and oppressed, thinking this can't be it, Jesus came for them. He ushered into every story and person there is. Matthew is saying, if you have eyes, let them see what Jesus the Messiah did for you and me. Look what God has done for you. He stepped in to give us life. That Jesus was the spark that lit the fuse for the proclamation of the gospel, that we can stand here today because for 2,000 years, faithful followers of Jesus have passed on what they've seen. That God invited them in and they invite us. That Jesus' birth ushers in the beginning of the kingdom of heaven on earth. And the question is, will we see it? Will we accept this message he's offering. And Matthew is showing for all these years, from Abraham to David to now in Jesus, now to us. Look at what has been done for you. And in our world, we just did a series reframing, so I'm not trying to get into this, but we see people building their own kingdoms. Herod went to all these great lengths to protect his own kingdom. He was insecure. He was trying to grasp all his power he had, and look at what's left of his. Ruins. We only remember Herod the Great for being threatened by a baby. That Herod's stuff and kingdom had a hold on him, and we have a chance to show ourselves that things don't. And this year, we mentioned that you have a part to play in making where you are more like heaven. That's what we're praying for. And the thing is, we can quickly let our hearts be run by other things. We quickly fall into where inwardly we're building competing kingdoms, mine and God's. And this year, I don't want us to be indifferent and unmoved in worship towards our God, who came in the flesh for us. I want us to grow. I want us to change. I want us to look more like Jesus this year. And in his gospel, there's a point where he's trying to teach the disciples, this is how you should pray. He said, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And this prayer that Jesus uses is a way for us to align our hearts with his will, with his kingdom, and what he wants for us. And we asked last week, what do you want to see in yourselves in 2025? What do you want to see in our church in 2025? And we want to be different. We have prayers and we want to see God move. And starting next Sunday, this is what we're going to invite you to participate with us. We're going to begin a 21 days of prayer and fasting to show us that our stuff doesn't have a hold on us. To see more and better in our church can only be done in the power of what Christ did for us. That our dependence has to come from him. And if you're unfamiliar with what fasting is, we get what prayer is. Fasting is this spiritual discipline that draws us closer to God. And we pray, and it brings clarity and understanding into our lives. And fasting, really what it does is shift our priorities. It puts him first and allows us to hear his plan and receive his direction. And as we do this, it's going to be challenging. Because in the Bible, fasting always has to do with eliminating distractions for a spiritual purpose. And it's a major way that we dethrone things that are in our hearts. So there's two questions that I have. As we're thinking through prayer and fasting, where is my heart? What am I aligning myself? Am I building competing kingdoms? Am I indifferent like the religious leaders, or am I worshipful like the Magi? And then maybe there's something that has a hold on me, something that takes so much of my time. And maybe you're unaware. Maybe ask your spouse or a close friend, where do you see that I need to realign my life, my heart? Is there something that is taking away from me seeking after God? And what I want to do is over the next week, I want you to prayerfully consider something. Something that is distracting you from following God, from hearing God's voice. And I want you to think about that and come next week, and we'll prayerfully write down that on a card, and you'll put it in an envelope. And then you'll open it after 21 days. And this is going to be hard. It's called a soul fast for a reason. That you'll feel it in your soul. It's going to be challenging. But then we're going to add an element that each of the Saturdays, we're going to fast from food. If you're medically able and you choose to do so. That during these 21 days, each Saturday, we will fast from Saturday morning to break our fast after church on Sunday. So about a day and a half. And it will be hard. That basically what we want is I will feed my spirit and tell my body no. And I want us to be able to gain that we have the ability to say no. Herod could not. The whole thing is who is the king of your heart? Because if we're not careful, the things in our life will take our priority of following faithfully after God. These idols start to take over and they start ruling what you do and why you do that. And if you participate, we're encouraging you guys. This is what we want to do to connect with one another. We're encouraging you to break your fast with another family. On each of the Sundays after church, you're breaking your fast, you'll be hungry, and you'll go eat together and break your fast. So if it's 21 days, there's something in your heart that is taken away from you following after Jesus. Expect there to be challenges along the way. Expect that there's going to be temptations. As we study next week, we're going to be looking at Jesus walking into the wilderness and fasting for 40 days. So I pray that you prayerfully consider joining us in 21 days of prayer and fasting. We'll have directions, we'll have guidelines for you to be able to help you along the way. But church, we want to see more and better this year. If we want this year to be different, we can't keep doing the same things. Let's pray. God, we love you and thank you for all that you do. And I'm reminded just in this text that, God, you are in control of our lives and that you place things for our good and for our benefit. So, God, I just pray that right now, as we head into a time of worship, that we're going to sing a song called Make Room. That with fasting, it's challenging. It is purposely setting aside distractions to focus on you. I think in this culture, in this time, I think we need to do that. That we have so many distractions in this world, so many things that will pull our time and our focus and our energy off of you. So God, I pray that you reveal to us ways that we can do that. If there's something that if a materialistic thing, if there's something that we're placing on the throne of our hearts, I pray that you reveal that to us. We don't want our stuff, our things, our possessions, our status to control us. But God, we want to this year to see the hope, have people see the hope they can find in Jesus. That he invites people in, gives them new life, and empowers them to go to be a light in this world. We have goals this year. We have plans, we have prayers. But we're realizing we're not doing this apart from you. We want to walk in step with the Spirit. We want to live according to how you've called us to so that we can love and minister to those around us. God, I want to be different this year. I want to be more like you. I want our church to look like you. And I want to see people connect here. I want to see people give their life to the Lord. And God, we're grateful that you, as Emmanuel, God with us, came into our mess for us. That surrounding your birth was all these crazy circumstances. But you stepped in, knowing where you're going, ultimately to be the one who rescued us from our sins. So God, allow us to remember that. Allow us to be reminded of that daily as we seek your face. We say this in your name. Amen.